Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I am Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we bring you a truly heart-wrenching and soul-crushing story of what is possibly the most brutal crime in modern English history. A murder that sent shockwaves throughout the United Kingdom and the world, not just because of the horror and sadism involved, but because of the innocence of the victim, who was just 17 years old. A schoolgirl who found herself in a romantic relationship with a sadistic killer. A story that is every parent's worst nightmare. It is the story of the murder of Kelly Ann Bates at the hands of the horrible monster, James Patterson Smith.
Let's begin. Prologue. The girl on the bed. On April 16, 1996, James Patterson Smith, an older man with a shaggy blonde haircut and glasses that looks a little like Phil Spector, walked into Gorton's police station and calmly told officers that his 17-year-old girlfriend Kelly, who lived with him, had accidentally drowned in the bathtub after inhaling water, and that he'd tried to resuscitate her, but his efforts had failed.
James's friends would describe him as, quote, house-proud and well-groomed, end quote. A teetotaler who didn't drink or smoke and went to church every Sunday.
The first red flag was that James hadn't immediately called an ambulance when he discovered his girlfriend drowned in the tub, and officers quickly made their way to Smith's house, holding on to the slim chance that they could possibly revive the girl with proper CPR.
Inside the house, there was blood splashed about on the walls and floor, and they found Kelly not in the bathroom, but laid out naked on the bed in the bedroom.
Officers, initially expecting a drowning, were shocked and horrified at what lay before them. The girl was unrecognizable, and she clearly hadn't died from an accidental drowning. She'd been tortured and mutilated to a degree they'd never witnessed before.
William Lawler, the Home Office pathologist who examined her body, said, quote, in my career, I have examined almost 600 victims of homicide, but I have never come across injuries so extensive.
Kelly Ann Bates had 150 separate wounds to her body. She had been partially scalped, burned with a hot iron, stabbed with knives, forks, scissors, and cut with pruning shears. Her face and genitals were mutilated beyond recognition, her hands and feet crushed, and both her eyes had been gouged out.
And horrifyingly, evidence in the home made it clear that she had been held captive there for at least a month, if not longer.
She was only 17, and an investigation would show that she and James had begun dating 3 years earlier, when she was only 14.
He'd originally lied to both her and her parents about his age, but it would be revealed that he was over 30 years older than her.
The murder inquiry was headed by Detective Sergeant Joseph Monahan of Greater Manchester Police, who said, quote, I have been in the police force for 15 years and have never seen a case as horrific as this.
The trial was so traumatizing to the jurors, who were shown grisly crime scene photographs, that it was also the first time the Manchester Crown Court offered professional counseling to the members of the jury to help them deal with the distress.
Every single member of the jury accepted the counseling.
And the world would wonder what kind of sadistic, depraved monster could do this to a pretty young girl from a loving family, and how had she fallen into his dark spell.
Chapter 1. Little Kelly.
They find love and their children play. The path is laid, they're on their way. A single look upon your face, and I can see that there's a place for everyone, for everyone, for everyone but me.
Kelly Ann Bates was born on the 18th of May, 1978, in Hattersley, which is a small town in Tameside, 10 miles east of Manchester city centre in the north of England.
As they'd previously had a son, Kelly's parents, Tommy and Margaret, were thrilled to have a baby girl. Kelly was tiny when she was born, having arrived 2 weeks and 6 days early, with thick, jet black hair.
And Kelly was the ideal little infant. She never fussed or cried, slept the whole night through, was as easy as a Sunday afternoon.
Her mother says, "I felt so proud. It was the first time in my life I'd ever done anything right. I got a son and a daughter, and I was just so proud. She was just perfect."
Having an older brother made Kelly tough and outgoing. She loved sports. She was a little jock growing up.
She was also more mature than many girls her age and very outgoing, but she had a wicked stubborn streak.
As her mother would say,
Kelly was the sort of girl, if she thought black was white, it was white, and there was no talking her out of it.
she had warm brown eyes, a cherubic face, and a snaggletooth smile.
As the years passed, Kelly grew into an extremely confident and independent girl. At the local school, her maturity made her stand out, and she came across as much older than she was. She was just unbelievably confident, believed in herself, and thought she could do anything.
As her mother would say,
"We always tried to raise the children with confidence and independence, because when I was a teenager, I wasn't very confident, and I didn't want them to be in the same boat."
Kelly really wanted to play on the local hockey team, so she tried out, even though she was very young, and she actually made the team. As just a 13-year-old girl, Kelly was playing hockey with fully grown women.
Everything in Kelly's life seemed perfect. She had fantastically supportive and loving parents, was doing well at school, and she excelled in sports.
In 1992, when Kelly was 14, she announced to her family that she had a boyfriend named Dave Smith.
Her parents didn't think too much about it, just assumed he was a boy from school, and it was a case of puppy love, as her father would later say.
Kelly would tell us, "Dave's walked me home. Dave's done this, Dave's done that." And I didn't go into it a lot because I just assumed it was someone Kelly's age.
It's around then that the trouble started.
Kelly had always been independent and a free spirit, but now she was spending more and more time away from the house, acting secretive, staying out late, and one night, she didn't come home at all. The next day, she said she'd just been out with friends and her parents let it slide, as they'd raised her to be an independent young lady. But then it happened again, this time for 2 nights in a row. And in a panic, her parents called the police.
Then things started getting really weird, as this Dave Smith started phoning the house and asking where Kelly was, asking if she'd arrived home, if she was okay.
At first, it was kind of a relief, especially as Kelly started disappearing for days at a time. And Kelly's parents assumed he was worried about her. He was calling to check in on her. He was concerned. And the calls actually put Margaret, her mother, at ease. At first, that is.
But then they finally met this Dave Smith, and they were in for a surprise. It was about 3 months after they'd started dating that Kelly finally brought her boyfriend home, and Margaret and Tommy were shocked at how old he was. Kelly was 14, and he was 32.
Dude, that would not be happening on my watch. I mean, I'm the coolest, most permissible parent. I let my daughter dye her hair, wear crazy goth makeup, go to the fair and the mall with her friends. But no way would I let my 14-year-old date a 32-year-old man. I mean, that's fucking sick. It's disgusting. 14? He's a pedophile. Honestly, I'd call the cops on him. Get a restraining order. Just fuck that, man. No way.
Yeah, seconded. Margaret says the first time she saw him, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she had an overwhelming urge to grab a knife and stab him. And it was crazy because she was a very peaceful person and had never felt that way. But a violence she had never felt for a human before just welled up inside her.
Good. That's her good parental instinct. Listen to your gut. Fuck.
Somehow, however, Kelly was able to convince them that everything was okay. She'd always been very well behaved, very close to her family, and she just seemed so happy with this man that they trusted her.
Oh, man. Fuck that. And this is the 90s. This isn't like the wild and carefree 70s when like anything went. Her parents weren't on drugs. I don't know. I just don't get it. I don't get it at all.
But it just got weirder. When they eventually found out, he wasn't 32 at all. He was actually 48, older than Kelly's dad, and his name wasn't even Dave.
Chapter 2. James.
Turns out Dave Smith hadn't just been lying about his age. He'd been lying about his name, too. His real name was James Patterson Smith, or as he was known about town, Jimmy Smith.
Jimmy Smith was an unemployed divorcee and compulsive liar living in the Gorton area of Manchester.
He'd been married for 10 years when his wife left him way back in 1980 because he'd been incredibly abusive, both physically and mentally.
His next relationship was with a 20-year-old girl named Tina Watson. He was with her for 2 years and they had a child together, but she too left him because of his violent abuse. He even beat her while she was pregnant. As she would later say, quote,
"He used me as a punching bag. At first it was now and again, just a little tap, but in the end it was every day. He'd smack me in the face or hit me over the head with an ashtray. He would kick me in the legs or between the legs."
At one point, in a horrible moment of foreshadowing, he would attempt to drown her while she was in the bathtub.
After that relationship came to an end in 1982, Smith started seeing a 15-year-old girl named Wendy Motorshead, whom he also abused. In one attack, he held her head underwater in the kitchen sink in an attempt to drown her.
So we can see that he's going to younger and younger girls, from 20 to 15, and now with Kelly, 14, growing more and more abusive and sick, with a penchant for drowning.
Psychologists state that offenders who target minors are typically driven by a combination of power needs, emotional deficits, and pathological fixations, rather than anything resembling love or desire. Instead, they seek power and control, gravitating toward children because minors are easier to dominate, manipulate, and silence.
Many of these men struggle with emotional and social immaturity, finding adult relationships too challenging, and instead pursuing children who seem more admiring, compliant, or less demanding of mature intimacy. And they suffer from cognitive distortion, convincing themselves that the child is mature, consenting, or benefiting, using these irrational beliefs to neutralize guilt and justify their actions. And many have paraphilic disorders, meaning their behavior stems from compulsive, pathological sexual fixations that impair normal adult bonding.
Sadly, Kelly's parents had tried to investigate this man's past, but had been unable to because he'd lied about his age. They'd been going around town asking everyone if they knew of this 32-year-old named Dave Smith, and no one had. He was this mystery man to them, as Kelly's father would later say.
Couldn't get me head around it. I could not grasp what was going on. I had been asking people about Dave Smith, 32, and obviously, nobody had a clue who I was talking about. Because he wasn't Dave Smith, who was 32. He was Jimmy Smith, who was 48.
And Kelly had known it the whole time. She'd been trying to protect this scumbag, using the years of trust she'd built up with her parents to hide his true identity, isolating herself from them.
Her parents had always trusted her, and now, thanks to this man, that trust was being eroded, which worked perfectly for this creep Jimmy, as Kelly keeping secrets from her family was the perfect wedge to drive her apart from them.
First step for a domestic abuser is to separate and isolate their target from their family, friends, and loved ones, so they can gain maximum control. And when he realized Kelly was lying to her parents about him, he instinctively knew that he could then control her and separate her, and this control escalated over the next weeks and months as he became more and more possessive.
Chapter 3, The Downward Spiral.
What I always wanted, I could never have it. Gone before I grabbed it, over before it started. No, I could never have it.
What I always dreamed of, I could always see us. Shadows in the distance, watching from the fences. But I could never have it.
Now the space between us laughs at all our hopes and dreams was I have fallen for my beliefs.
My time stands still
while you're dancing in the darkness.
Kelly started spending all of her weekends with this Jimmy Smith. She'd go to school on Friday morning and not come home again until Sunday night.
When Kelly left Jimmy's house on Sunday, he'd go right with her to the bus stop and put her on the bus himself. Then Jimmy would go straight home and call Kelly's mom, saying that he just put her on a bus. And then he'd call again the second Kelly got in, somehow knowing exactly when she was due to arrive home, which became very creepy, as Margaret later said.
One day I said to Tommy, there's something not right about this bloke. You know, it's creepy the way he's tracking everything Kelly does. We hadn't brought Kelly up to be monitored. We wanted Kelly to be independent.
Margaret says as Kelly would walk through the door, the phone would ring. And if she wasn't there when he called, he'd know that she'd gone somewhere else and there'd be trouble, as he'd completely secluded her from her friends. No one could have Kelly but him. Not her friends, not her family, no one.
But as for Kelly, his possessiveness actually made her feel comforted and loved. Here was this older guy who loved her so much he wants to know exactly where she is at all times, to be sure she's safe, because he cares so much about her. In her mind, it was all very romantic.
And the idea of secrets and forbidden love is enticing and sexy. It creates this incredible bond. It's them against the world, and nobody could understand their love.
And Jimmy uses this bond as a means of manipulating and gaslighting her, becoming more and more possessive. Possessiveness which Kelly continued to misunderstand as affection and love.
Yeah, this is Kelly's first relationship, and being with this older guy made her feel grown up, mature, and adult. And the things he's doing, she thinks that's what all adults do. She thinks is completely normal.
Sadly, it may have been Kelly's mother's efforts to make her an independent spirit that helped form her desire to have a much older man as her boyfriend. As psychologist M. Ainsworth says in his work, Patterns of Attachment, quote, inconsistent caregiving can create dependency patterns that can be misdirected toward adults outside the family.
To Kelly, who may have been secretly insecure about her identity and felt invisible from her peers, Jimmy represented an authority figure giving her protection and approval.
And abusers like Jimmy are skilled at being hyper charming and super attentive toward their victims at the start, love bombing them to get them to just be totally consumed in this relationship.
Older men often appear more confident, attentive, and complimentary. And this can create a false sense of being special, which is psychologically intoxicating for someone still forming an identity.
And the implicit power imbalance can make young girls mistake dominance for maturity, seeing older men as confident and worldly, giving a feeling of safety and sophistication. But it's actually a dangerous imbalance that makes minors vulnerable to manipulation.
And a good groomer knows how to engineer this false attraction using flattery and gifts while being emotionally manipulative and isolating their victims from peers.
Often the grooming itself, the very act of it, creates artificial dependency, making the child believe they chose the relationship. But this is not attraction, it's coercion.
Psychologists say that young girls who seem drawn to older men are often responding to unmet developmental needs, not sexual desire. They're trying to solve personal issues, such as loneliness, insecurity, fear, and a lack of belonging.
And the older men who exploit this are taking advantage of a child's unfinished identity.
By the time Kelly was 16, she and Jimmy were spending all of their time together, and things were turning distinctly darker. Kelly began to change. She stopped washing. Her hair was greasy. She'd always walk bent over with her head down. As her mother would say,
her chin was on her chest all the time. She just walked around like that.
Even her clothes changed. She dressed in baggy clothing and no longer wore the bright colors she was known for. Everything became more subdued.
As criminal behavior analyst Laura Richards points out, when someone's self-esteem has been stripped away, they no longer respect their own bodies or how they look because their character is being eroded and replaced with a being that is controllable and manipulated.
As her father says, her whole demeanor changed. She wasn't my Kelly anymore. She weren't the bright and bubbly Kelly. She just sort of withdrew into herself.
Finally, Margaret hit her breaking point and told her daughter that she'd had enough. She couldn't stand the worry anymore. And to try and get Kelly to see the error of her ways, Margaret told her if she couldn't follow the rules of the house and be in when she was told, she'd have to leave the house.
Which, in my opinion, is a bad move. I mean, she's only 16. It's too young to be on your own, in my opinion. Honestly, they'd let the situation get so out of control for years. I don't know what they could do at this point. It really just should have been nipped in the bud 2 years earlier.
It's so wild it got. It's so wild it started at all. So a few days later, after having spent the night out, Kelly came home and started packing her bags. Her mother asked her, "What are you doing?"
"I'm packing. You said the next time I spent the night out without permission, I had to go."
Come on, Kelly, you know I was just saying that to stop you from doing it. You know I'd never throw you out.
And when Kelly turned around, one half of her face was entirely black with bruises. Margaret was shocked. She said she'd never seen anything like it.
But Kelly had a story for what had happened. She told her that she'd been jumped by some girls in the street, and that she'd been discovered unconscious by this couple who'd taken her back to their house.
The story didn't make any sense. Why would some random couple take Kelly to their home? Why didn't they take her to the hospital or call the police or call her parents? But Kelly couldn't give her mother a straight answer.
So Margaret contacted social services, and she tells them what's going on with her daughter. But Margaret couldn't prove that it was Jimmy who'd beaten her, and because Kelly was now 16, social services was powerless to do anything.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still like this, but in England at the time, Kelly was considered an adult at just 16. And as far as social services were concerned, she was grown and on her own. She could make her own decisions. So Kelly moved in with Jimmy at his 2-bedroom semi-detached house in Furnivall Road in nearby Gorton in November of 1995.
Flustered and desperate, Margaret next contacted the domestic violence unit. They told her to make an appointment with doctors in Kelly's name, then go herself and tell the doctors what was happening, which she did. Now, if Kelly ever ended up in the hospital or at a doctor's office, there was a record of the abuse.
After that, Margaret didn't really feel there was anything else she could do. That if she went any further, she'd just push Kelly even closer to Jimmy. But despite Margaret's best efforts, things just got worse.
Chapter 4, Furnivall Road.
After moving in with Jimmy, whenever Kelly would come home to see her parents, her mom would notice that she was often covered in bruises and scrapes. Kelly would often have fingerprint bruising on her arms and neck, classic signs of abuse.
But Kelly told them she was getting the injuries in other ways, like falling down or walking into a wall, accidentally slamming into a door. And sadly, covering up for an abuser is typical in domestic abuse cases, and Jimmy was most likely telling her he was beating her because he loved her, and she was unconsciously asking for it, needing to be disciplined because she was acting out like a child.
He's totally eroded her sense of self and would tell her, "Look what you made me do. I hit you because I care about you."
Abusers know what they're doing. They start off charming. They love bomb their victims with so much affection and love that their partner's blown away. And then the mask starts to slip and they reveal their true self. The victim will think that it's out of character behavior. And it's because of them, that they're doing something wrong to bring out the worst in this person they love.
And of course, there's trauma bonding, a psychological attachment that forms between a vulnerable person and someone who harms, manipulates, or controls them, created through cycles of fear, affection, and intermittent reward. When an abuser alternates between cruelty and kindness, the victim's nervous system itself becomes conditioned to cling to the moments of relief, interpreting them as safety.
Over time, this pattern can distort judgment, weaken boundaries, and make the victim feel emotionally dependent on the very person causing the harm. Trauma bonding is not a sign of genuine connection. It's a survival response shaped by instability, fear, and unmet emotional needs.
Being in an abusive relationship is literally like becoming addicted to a drug. It's a roller coaster with punishment and intermittent reinforcement of love and kindness. So the victim's body is going through this turmoil of chemicals and hormones. One minute there's a high stress situation, there's violence, there's anger. The body is being flooded with high levels of stress hormone cortisol. Then they get a rush of dopamine when affection and love is given as a reward. And when you have this back and forth and up and down, the body becomes addicted to it.
And then, alongside all this fear and control, comes the breakdown of a person's self-esteem, which makes them feel unable to leave, because surely no one else will love them. They don't feel confident or worthy enough to leave the situation because they'll never find anybody else. Nobody could love a person as worthless as them.
Then Margaret, yet again, spotted something deeply troubling. Kelly had a bite mark on her hand. But again, Kelly was ready with an explanation. She told Margaret that she'd been running for a bus and she fell on a fence and cut her hand. But it was clearly a bite mark, with teeth marks visible. And because the wound was so deep, it must have been an absolutely savage attack.
At this point, Margaret begs Kelly to stop seeing Jimmy, but Kelly refused and told her mom that she was going to see less of her because she just got a new job at a factory. So from now on, she was going to be very busy, probably too busy to visit.
Chapter 5, Domestic Slave.
And so, Kelly's visits to her parents' house stopped, and it was just phone calls after that.
And this is all part of Jimmy's plan to isolate Kelly. He's turned her into his own little domestic slave, keeping her under lock and key. And he knows that if people see her injuries, it will get out. So he's keeping her there, inside, locked up at all times.
As 1995 became 1996, and at just 16 years old, Kellyanne Bates was isolated and alone, at the mercy of a violent abuser.
And Margaret at this point realizes this and begs her husband Tommy to drive her to Jimmy's house, telling him,
"We have to go get her. She's not okay. I know it."
But Tommy said that if they showed up and tried to drag Kelly away, that it would just make everything worse, that they should just let things be and Kelly would come back on her own when the time was right.
On Mother's Day, Margaret got a card from Kelly, but she knew right away that it wasn't her daughter's handwriting. Plus, she thought that it was really weird that Kelly would only send a card and that she wouldn't phone or visit. She couldn't be working that much. Surely she'd be able to just stop by for a spot of tea with her mother on Mother's Day.
After this card, there was nothing for weeks from Kelly. But then it was Tommy's birthday and their anniversary, which had traditionally been big events for the family. And 2 more cards arrived at the house.
Again, neither looked like they were in Kelly's handwriting.
The cards looked like someone had written it and then gone over and over and over it with a pen, to the point where the handwriting was like completely obliterated. Margaret says,
"I just threw them across the room and said, 'She's not sent these. I bet he's got her tied up somewhere. She can't move because she's not wrote this.'"
She was very right. She hadn't wrote the letters. Her abuser had. A sick, compulsive liar. A master manipulator who was trying to gaslight Kelly's parents, just as he'd gaslit her.
Margaret told her husband, "We have to do something. He's going to kill her. I know it."
But Tommy just said, "She'll be all right. How could someone kill someone that they loved?"
Chapter 6. The Horrible End.
The abuse in that house in Fernville Road slowly escalated to savage and unthinkable levels.
Jimmy began to keep Kelly captive by tying her hair to a radiator in the upstairs bedroom. Sometimes he'd fashion a leash tight around her neck and tie her to furniture so she couldn't leave. He'd kick in her knees so she was unable to walk and couldn't possibly escape. Then crushed her hands and feet, leaving her totally helpless.
He wouldn't allow her to eat. She went from 120 pounds down to 70, losing nearly half her weight. She was like a skeleton, her bones protruding from a thin layer of skin. He even refused her water, giving her only enough to sustain life and no more.
He beat her and burned her with a hot iron, leaving scars on her thighs, buttocks, and left leg.
He deliberately began to disfigure her, using garden shears to scalp her and mutilate her face, cutting her ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, lips, before moving on to her genitals.
He stabbed her with knives, forks, and scissors, leaving a trail of blood splatter throughout the house of horror. Kelly even had stab wounds inside her mouth, presumably inflicted while she screamed.
And how the neighbors heard nothing is an utter mystery.
Between 5 days and 3 weeks before her death, he blinded her, gouging her eyes out with his bare hands. When the wounds to her eyes began to heal, he took a knife and opened them back up, attempting to sever her optic nerves.
And then finally, in what at this point must have been an act of mercy, he put her battered, mutilated, and emaciated body in a bath of scalding hot water and drowned her before laying her out on the bed in some sick form of showmanship.
And then on April 16th, 1996, James Smith strolled into Gordon's police station and calmly told officers there that his girlfriend Kelly had accidentally drowned in the bath.
How could he have possibly thought this excuse of accidental drowning could have worked is totally beyond me. It's just insane, man. It's all just horribly disgusting. It's all bad, but I kept finding myself wondering about the eyes. Why this disturbing obsession with her eyes? I mean, he's doing everything he could to disable her and make her a prisoner. I get that, but psychologically, it just seems so much deeper. And I ended up going down this total rabbit hole with the eyes.
While it's a common trope in crime fiction and horror movies, for instance in Red Dragon, the prequel to Silence of the Lambs, the Tooth Fairy killer cuts out the eyes of his victims and replaces them with shards of broken mirrors. In reality, it is actually very rare for killers to remove victims' eyes, an act called enucleation.
Way back in the day, some killers believed that the last thing a person sees before they die is physically recorded like a photograph on the person's eye, what was called optography, something that is very much not true at all. But in 1927, killers William Brown and William Kennedy infamously shot out Police Captain George Guttenridge's eyes to erase their image from his retina.
Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, cut out the eyes of victim Maxine Zazara and kept them.
But most famous is Charles Albright, notoriously known as the Eyeball Killer, an American serial killer from Dallas, Texas, whose crimes were fueled by a lifelong, deeply rooted obsession with eyeballs that supposedly started when he was a little boy and into taxidermy, and his mother wouldn't let him buy expensive glass eyes for his projects. We got to cover this guy at some point. It's really crazy case. It's very, very disturbing.
Yikes. After shooting his victims in the head, he would use a scalpel to surgically remove their eyes with such precision that he left the surrounding eyelids completely undamaged. Investigators eventually focused their search on individuals with surgical or taxidermy experience, leading them directly to him.
Crazy. And then there was also Randy Kraft, a really sick fuck, one of the freeway killers we covered way back when we started the show, who would sometimes cut off his victims' eyelids after he drugged them and then use a car cigarette lighter to burn their eyeballs out.
The question lingers. Why do they feel this compulsion to do this?
According to the FBI Behavioral Science Unit's crime classification manual, quote, mutilation often reflects the offender's attempt to communicate anger, dominance, or symbolic meaning. And while dominance was definitely a huge factor, obviously, I was stuck on the symbolic meanings. And the whole Shakespeare, eyes are the windows to the soul.
In the manual Practical Homicide Investigation, Vernon Gerberth writes, quote, the body is the message and tells investigators what the killer needs to express.
The academic journal Aggression and Violent Behavior states, quote, symbolic violence often targets features associated with communication, unquote. And so, the eyes represent perception, judgment, and awareness, and removing them could symbolize silencing the victim's ability to judge or witness.
Obviously, there is a symbolic punishment as well. He is physically telling her, you don't get to see anymore. But deeper still, he is symbolically punishing the victim for seeing something the killer wishes to erase, or a belief that the victim's gaze was threatening, shaming, or condemning. And by destroying the eyes, the killer is removing her identity, power, and purity, not only revealing a disturbing sadism, but a high need for control.
And then there is the dehumanization aspect, as eyes are central to human identity, and removing them erases individuality. It makes the victim feel less like a person, more like a thing, and allows the killer to detach emotionally from the act.
This is often seen in offenders with antisocial or psychopathic traits who struggle with empathy, such as Richard Ramirez.
But in this case, I believe removing the eyes was just the ultimate assertion of dominance, of control and power. It reinforces his fantasy of omnipotence. It's part of a ritualized pattern of asserting control, which Jimmy has been demonstrating from the very beginning when he'd escort her to the bus station and then immediately call her parents.
Chapter 7. The Investigation.
When the police came to Kelly's parents' house to tell them that she was dead, Margaret told them that she already knew, that she'd sensed it and just been there waiting for their arrival.
The murder inquiry was headed by Detective Sergeant Joseph Monahan of Greater Manchester Police, who, we said this at the beginning of the episode, but I'm going to reiterate. I have been in the police force for 15 years and have never seen a case as horrific as this.
The autopsy revealed a rough narrative of her torture. There were over 150 different wounds, all in different states of healing, meaning the torture had gone on for a very, very long time. The autopsy also revealed the starvation and lack of water, and that she'd been alive for at least 5 days, but most likely weeks after being blinded. And that when the wounds to her eye sockets began to heal, he then dug them out with a knife in an attempt to remove the optic nerves.
After the autopsy, police went and examined the house and compared it to the wounds that Kelly had on her body, and they were able to further construct what had happened to her, ascertaining she'd been tied to the radiator in the upstairs bedroom by her hair, before he'd scalped her, and using blood splatter evidence to determine where some of the many stabbings and mutilations had taken place.
Despite all of this forensic evidence, Jimmy maintained that Kelly's death was an accident.
As Laura Richards put it, her body was the crime scene and the injuries her history, and they made it very clear this was no accident.
Several weeks after the murder, Kelly's family were finally granted her body back for burial, and they decided to have the funeral the day before what would have been her 18th birthday.
Kelly's parents, Tommy and Margaret, asked the funeral director if he could fix Kelly's disfigurements and make it so that they could hug her one last time. And the funeral director told them that he was a very experienced and skilled mortician, and that he would give her his best work, and Kelly would look beautiful for her funeral.
But sadly, he spoke too soon. He picked Kelly up on a Monday, and the very next day, he came straight to their parents' house and told them he'd never seen anything like this before, that Kelly's injuries were so great there wasn't anything he could do after all. The killer had just left very little for him to work with. Fuck, man. It's so intense.
Yeah. As the funeral procession went through town, Tommy and Margaret were shocked to see how many people turned up. So many people they didn't even know. Her tragic story had struck a nerve and touched the hearts of people throughout England.
People came from all over the country to her funeral, and in the church, it was standing room only.
And Margaret told the vicar before the funeral began, quote, "I don't want the word forgiveness mentioned even once during this ceremony."
Oh, makes sense to me. Fuck that monster.
And Kelly was laid to rest in a beautiful cemetery atop a grassy knoll with views of the moors and surrounded by countryside.
Chapter 8. The Trial.
In November 1997, the trial of 49-year-old James Patterson Smith began at the Manchester Crown Court, and what emerged was a portrait of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type character, a person with two distinct personalities.
To the outside world, Jimmy Smith was a nice, church-going guy. He was described by acquaintances as, quote, house-proud and well-groomed, a teetotaler and a non-smoker. But behind closed doors, he was a horrifying monster, one with a long past, who'd been an abusive stalker and dangerously violent man, and that everything he'd done to Kelly, he'd done to other women before.
His first marriage was revealed, and how it had ended due to violence. How he'd then used 20-year-old Tina Watson, whom he'd had a child with, as a punching bag, and had attempted to drown her in a bathtub as he'd done to Kelly. Other women came forward to paint Smith as a misogynist who was obsessively jealous and turned to violence to control them.
There was Wendy Mottershead, who'd been only 15 when she was with him, who took the stand to describe how he'd hold her head underwater in the kitchen sink in an attempt to, again, drown her.
But despite all of these women coming forward, Jimmy claimed that it was he who was the victim, saying on the stand that Kelly and all these other women and girls had been asking for it, saying Kelly had driven him to kill her by taunting him.
This monster had the nerve to tell the jury, quote, "She put me through hell, winding me up, and had a bad habit of hurting herself to make it look worse on me."
When Jimmy was asked to explain why he had blinded, stabbed, and battered Kellyanne, he said she had dared him to do it, challenging him to hurt her.
But the prosecution was relentless in explaining what Kelly had been through, showing them grisly crime scene photos that they would never, ever forget, of her battered, emaciated form, scalped and eyeless, face and genitals mutilated. Peter Oppenshaw, the lead prosecutor in Smith's trial, said, quote,
"It was as if he deliberately disfigured her, causing her the utmost pain, distress, and degradation. The injuries were not the result of one sudden eruption of violence. They must have been caused over a long period, and they were so extensive and so terrible that the defendant must have deliberately and systematically tortured the girl. Her death must have been a merciful end to her torment, because the mental pain would have been intense, causing anguish and torment, no doubt to the point of mental breakdown and collapse."
The jury took just 1 hour to find him guilty of Kelly's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, and the judge, Mr. Justice Sachs, stating, quote, "This has been a terrible case, a catalog of depravity by one human being upon another. You are a highly dangerous person. You are an abuser of women, and I intend, so far as it is my power, that you will abuse no more."
Afterwards, for the first time in Manchester court history, the jury were offered professional counseling to help them deal with the distress of seeing the photographs of Bates' injuries and the, quote, "sickening violence" of the case.
Every single member of the jury accepted the offer.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the horrible murder of Kellyanne Bates and of the monster who committed it, James Patterson Smith. Thank you for listening.
And you have a story you'd like us to cover, let us know at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye-bye.
In this world of ours, and we made everything the shape of the clouds, the stars in the sky above, and held in these two hands is a flag I can't raise in this world of ours. Settles in everything. Used to veil down. There's not much that we can